Press the tips of 2 fingers against the inside of your opposite wrist. Find the pulse. Press harder until the pulse disappears under the pressure. Hold it. Now release. The artery springs back. The pulse returns. That springback is not your heart. Your heart is somewhere else, doing its own job. The springback is the wall of the artery itself, performing an act of biological negotiation that you have just interrupted and resumed. Here is what I want to tell you. The thing pushing back against your fingers is the same thing that decides, 3 decades before any of this matters, whether your doctor is correct when he tells you that you are healthy. I will be honest with you. When a physician looks at a blood pressure cuff reading and a cholesterol number and tells a patient that everything looks fine, he is telling the truth about what he has measured. He is also not telling the truth about what is happening inside that patient. He cannot. His instruments were not designed to detect it. Your arteries already know. I had to figure this out for myself, the way a physicist figures anything out. I asked, what is an artery? Not what does it do, what is it? And when you ask that question carefully, the answer is not what they taught you in school. Let me give you a tour. If you took every artery, every vein, every capillary in your body and laid them end to end, you would have something on the order of 100,000 kilometers of tubing, 2.5 trips around the equator. That is the gross plumbing. But the plumbing is not the interesting part. The interesting part is the wall. Cut any artery in cross-section and you find 3 layers. The outer coat, called the adventitia, is a kind of fibrous overcoat. The middle coat, called the media, is smooth muscle wrapped in spirals, the part that contracts and relaxes to change the vessel's diameter. And the inner coat, the one closest to the blood, is called the intima. The intima is the part I want you to know about. Because what most people imagine when they think of the intima, a slick inner pipe, a passive bore through which blood slides, is wrong. The intima is alive. It is a single layer of cells, 1 cell thick, laid down like tile across the entire interior surface of your vascular system. That single cell layer has a name. It is called the endothelium. Now, if you took every endothelial cell in a human adult and unrolled it into a sheet, the sheet would cover something on the order of 4,000 square meters, the size of an entire football field, including the stands. You have a football field's worth of 1 cell thick tissue dividing your blood from your flesh, and the entire thing is making chemical decisions every second of your life. It is the largest organ in your body. You have never heard of it. The endothelium does not just line your vessels. It senses the blood passing over it. It manufactures hormones. It decides how wide each vessel will be at each moment. It controls whether the platelets in your bloodstream stick to it or slide past. It controls the immune cells. It controls inflammation. It even controls, and this is the part I want you to remember, whether the molecules in your blood are allowed to cross into the wall of the artery itself. Above this single layer of cells sits something I did not know existed when I was your age. It is a coat, a gel, a kind of fluffy carpet made of sugars and proteins, fluffed up out of the endothelial surface into the bloodstream itself. It is called the Glycocalyx. Glykes is the Greek word for sweet. Calyx is the Greek word for husk. The sweet husk. It is real. It is about half a micrometer thick on average, and it is the actual interface between your blood and your body. The blood, when it touches your vessel, does not touch the cell. It touches the sugar coat. So now I want to tell you what this single layer of cells does. Not abstractly, specifically, molecularly. In 1980, a pharmacologist named Robert Furchgott, working at the State University of New York Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, was running a rather ordinary experiment on rabbit aortas. He wanted to see how the muscle in the arterial wall responded to a chemical called acetylcholine. He had been doing this experiment for years. Strip the artery, expose it to the chemical, watch the muscle relax or contract. But this time he made a mistake. or rather his graduate student did. The student left the inner lining of the artery in place, the endothelium, when usually they would have scraped it off. And when Furchgott applied the chemical, the muscle did the opposite of what he expected. It relaxed beautifully, strongly, reliably. He repeated the experiment with the endothelium scraped off, the way it was usually done. Now the muscle did nothing. Or worse, it contracted. The endothelium was making something that diffused from the inner lining to the muscle layer below it in a fraction of a second and told the muscle to let go. Furchgott called this mystery substance endothelium-derived relaxing factor. The name was a placeholder. He had no idea what it actually was. It took 7 years. In 1987, Salvador Moncada, working at the Wellcome Research Laboratories in England, and a separate group led by Luis Ignarro identified the molecule. It was the simplest gas you could imagine. One nitrogen atom, one oxygen atom, bonded together. Nitric oxide, a pollutant in car exhaust, a signaling molecule in your arteries. Here is what your endothelium does. It contains an enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, or as I will call it from here on, ENOS. This enzyme takes the amino acid arginine, an ordinary protein building block, abundant in everything you eat, and converts it into nitric oxide and another molecule called citrulline. The nitric oxide is a gas. It diffuses freely. It moves from the endothelial cell through the wall into the smooth muscle beneath in a matter of milliseconds. When the gas arrives at the smooth muscle, it activates a second enzyme. The muscle relaxes. The artery widens. Blood flows more easily. Blood pressure drops, slightly, locally, in exactly that spot, exactly when needed. This is happening, right now, throughout your body, billions of times per second. Now ask the question that interests a physicist. What turns the enzyme on? What tells the endothelial cell to make nitric oxide? The answer is mechanical. The answer is friction. When blood flows over the endothelial surface, it drags. The drag is small but measurable. We call it shear stress. The endothelial cell has on its surface specialized sensors that respond to that drag. They bend, they deform, they signal inward, and the signal switches on the ENOS enzyme. The harder the blood pushes, the more nitric oxide gets made. The more nitric oxide gets made, the wider the artery opens. The wider it opens, the more blood flows. The artery is making itself. When you are young, this loop runs without trouble. When you are healthy, this loop runs without trouble. When you sleep, when you eat, when you climb stairs, when you make love, the endothelium produces nitric oxide on demand, second by second, in response to the actual mechanical conditions of your blood flow. But the loop is fragile. The enzyme requires cofactors. It requires a particular form of folate. It requires sufficient arginine. It requires a substance called tetrahydrobiopterin to function correctly. When any of these is depleted, and they are depleted by insulin resistance, by inflammation, by oxidative stress, the enzyme begins to malfunction. It still consumes arginine, it still goes through the motions, but instead of producing nitric oxide, it begins to produce a destructive molecule called superoxide. Same enzyme, wrong output. This is called ENOS uncoupling. And this is the first event. Years before your blood pressure climbs, years before a single calcium speck shows up on any scan, the enzyme that should be opening your arteries begins making the molecule that injures them. Your doctor cannot measure this. There is no blood test for it. There is no cuff for it. But your arteries know. They are stiffening, very slightly, every time the loop fails. And while the enzyme is failing inside the cell, something is happening on top of the cell, in that sweet husk, the glycocalyx that I told you about a moment ago. The glycocalyx was discovered visually in the 1960s by electron microscopists who kept seeing a fuzzy halo at the edge of every blood vessel they imaged. For years it was thought to be an artifact. a staining error, a mistake. It is not a mistake. It is a tissue. The glycocalyx is built out of long-chain sugar molecules, glycoproteins and proteoglycans, anchored into the endothelial cell surface like blades of grass anchored into soil. The blades are negatively charged. They repel things in the blood. They keep platelets from sticking. They keep white blood cells from sticking. They hold enzymes in place. They are, in effect, a force field made of sugar. A force field made of sugar. When the glycocalyx is healthy, the blood does not actually touch the endothelium. There is half a micrometer of gel between them. The cells underneath are protected. The vessel wall is sealed. Cholesterol particles, fat droplets, blood sugar, none of these reach the cell. When the glycocalyx degrades, all of that protection is lost. And the glycocalyx is constantly being degraded and constantly being rebuilt. The rebuilding is slow. The degradation is fast. Here is what degrades it. High blood sugar, even a single meal high enough in refined carbohydrate to spike glucose past the renal threshold, can shed glycocalyx measurably within hours. Inflammatory cytokines shed it. Oxidized lipids shed it. Surgery sheds it. Sepsis strips it almost completely. In other words, everything that civilization has invented, in terms of food and stress and sedentary living, attacks this gel coat. And the body cannot rebuild it as fast as we tear it down. When the gel thins, the endothelium becomes accessible. The particles that have been brushing past for 30 years suddenly have a place to lodge. The sensors on the endothelial cell that responded to shear stress and produced nitric oxide now respond differently, because part of what made them mechanosensitive was the gel sitting on top of them. This is not symptomatic. There is no pain, no twinge, no swelling. There is a tissue, half a micrometer thick, that you have never heard of, getting thinner every year, and it is one of the most informative early markers of cardiovascular trouble that we have. Your doctor does not measure it. Your arteries know it is happening. Once the gel thins, the cargo in your bloodstream, the cholesterol carriers, the fat-bearing particles, the things your liver packages for delivery, encounter the endothelial surface directly. And some of them get caught. I want to tell you about a particle. In 1985, two scientists named Michael Brown and Joseph Goldstein, working at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, received the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. They received it for understanding what happens to cholesterol when it enters a cell. They studied a family of children. The children had cholesterol levels so high that they had heart attacks before they reached the age of 20. They had inherited a defect in a receptor on the surface of liver cells, a receptor whose job was to pull cholesterol out of the blood. Without it, the cholesterol accumulated. With double the defect, the children died young. Brown and Goldstein mapped the entire pathway. They showed how the receptor binds the cholesterol-carrying particle, swallows it, breaks it down, and delivers the cholesterol inside the cell. The receptor, they discovered, binds to a specific molecule, a protein wrapped around the cholesterol particle, a protein that acts as the address label. The protein is called apolipoprotein B, or apoB. Every particle in your bloodstream that carries cholesterol except one has apoB wrapped around it. The exception is high-density lipoprotein, which carries cholesterol back to the liver instead of out to the tissues. Everything else, low-density lipoprotein, very low density, intermediate density, the small dense remnant particles, the molecule called lipoproteina, every one of them is wrapped in apoB. Now here is the thing your doctor's cholesterol number does not capture. Total cholesterol as a number is the total amount of cholesterol in your blood, but cholesterol is the cargo. apoB is the truck. Two people can have the same total cargo and a completely different number of trucks. One has a few large trucks, the other has many small trucks. The number of trucks is what matters, because each truck is a particle, and each particle is what bumps into your arterial wall. When your glycocalyx is intact, the trucks slide by. When your glycocalyx has thinned, the trucks brush against the endothelium, And when an apoB particle encounters the space just beneath the endothelial cells, its protein coat binds to molecules called proteoglycans, sticky molecules, anchors. The particle gets caught, not deposited. The word matters. Cholesterol is not floating around looking for a vessel to plate onto, the way mineral plates onto the inside of a kettle. The cholesterol particle is actively grabbed, pulled into the wall, and held there. The biochemistry of this trapping was being mapped throughout the 1970s and 80s, and in my opinion, it is one of the cleanest causal frameworks in all of vascular biology. The question is not how much cholesterol is in your blood. The question is how many apoB particles are bumping against your endothelium every second looking for a place to stick. And once a particle is held, it changes. The proteins on its surface oxidize. The lipids inside it oxidize. A team led by Daniel Steinberg at the University of California in San Diego showed throughout the 1980s that oxidized low-density lipoprotein is biochemically different from the unoxidized form. It is toxic. It is recognized as foreign. It calls the immune system. That call is the next thing I want to tell you about. The oxidized particle becomes a signal, and the signal calls cells that should not be there to a wound that was never made. In 1973, a pathologist named Russell Ross at the University of Washington in Seattle proposed something that was, at the time, controversial. He said that atherosclerosis, the disease that builds up plaque inside arteries, was not a disease of accumulation. It was a disease of inflammation. His paper went into the New England Journal of Medicine. He called it the response to injury hypothesis. He revised and expanded it in 1986. By then he had collected enough evidence to make his case quite firmly. Here is what Ross said. Atherosclerosis is not cholesterol building up on the inside of a tube like rust on the inside of a pipe. Atherosclerosis is an immune response. The artery is treating the trapped, oxidized apoB particle as a foreign invader. And like every foreign invader, it is treated with a chronic, low-grade, persistent immune attack. When an apoB particle gets trapped and oxidized, the endothelial cell above it sends a chemical signal into the bloodstream. The signal recruits white blood cells. Specifically, it recruits monocytes, circulating immune cells that are constantly patrolling. The monocytes adhere to the endothelial surface. They squeeze between the cells. They cross into the subendothelial space. And once they are there, they transform into a different cell type called a macrophage. The macrophage has one job. It eats. It engulfs the oxidized particle. It tries to digest it. But the particle is not biological in the way the macrophage expects. It cannot be processed. It accumulates inside the cell in droplets of cholesterol until the macrophage is so full of fat that under the microscope it has a foamy appearance. It is now called a foam cell. The foam cell releases more inflammatory signals, more monocytes arrive, more foam cells form. The smooth muscle cells in the artery wall, the ones I told you about earlier, the ones that should be relaxing and contracting in response to nitric oxide, those cells receive a different signal now. They begin to migrate. They begin to multiply. They begin to lay down collagen. A cap forms. A small lump. Then a larger lump. The artery wall is no longer smooth. It is building, on the inside of itself, a structure that does not belong there. It is not deposited. It is built. The artery is constructing this plaque in response to the chronic immune signal. The longer the signal continues, the larger the structure grows. The structure has a fibrous cap of collagen on top, a soft, fatty core in the middle, and an angry, inflamed border at its edges. And then the structure does something quietly catastrophic. It begins to thin, or it ruptures. The fibrous cap cracks. The fatty core spills into the bloodstream. The clotting system, which has been waiting in your blood for decades for exactly such an event, swarms the spill in seconds. A clot forms. The artery closes. The tissue downstream of that artery loses its blood supply. The cells begin to die. If the artery feeds your heart, you call this a heart attack. If it feeds your brain, you call it a stroke. But here is the part that should change your relationship with what your doctor tells you. The heart attack does not usually come from the largest plaque. The largest plaques are stable. They have thick caps. They are visible. They have been there a long time. The heart attack comes from the smaller, newer, inflamed plaque, the one that no scan has caught yet, the one that has been growing quietly in a so-called healthy patient for 15 years. Your doctor's tests are looking for the wrong plaques. Your arteries already know which ones matter. Now, I want to pause the cascade here and be honest with you about what we know and what we suspect and what is still under investigation. Because I am telling you a story that has a lot of strong evidence behind it, but not every piece is equally strong, and I will not lie to you. I will sort the claims into 4 shelves. Top shelf. Anchored. Settled. The nitric oxide mechanism, the work of Furchgott, of Moncada, of Ignaro, is as solid as any biochemistry in cardiovascular medicine. The pathway is mapped. The enzymes are characterized. The cofactors are known. When I tell you the endothelium makes nitric oxide in response to shear stress, you can take that to the bank. The same goes for the work of Brown and Goldstein on the LDL receptor. The pathway by which cholesterol is removed from blood, the role of apoB as a recognition tag, the genetic disorders that disrupt the pathway, this is rock-solid molecular biology. Also Nobel decorated. Middle shelf. Strongly supported, almost certainly correct. The trapping of apoB particles by proteoglycans in the artery wall is supported by mechanistic work, animal models, and the consistency with which particle number predicts cardiovascular outcomes in human populations. It is the best supported framework for understanding the early accumulation of plaque. But it is a framework. Some details continue to be refined. The oxidation hypothesis, Steinberg's work, has been replicated extensively in test tubes and in animal models. In living human beings, demonstrating the same chemistry in real time is much harder. The general story is correct. Some specifics are still being argued about. Lower shelf. Physiologically plausible, clinically suggestive, not yet pinned to a number. The Glycocalyx as a primary early marker of dysfunction is reasonable based on every animal experiment we have. In humans, measuring it directly is technically difficult. Its central role in early disease is consistent with everything else we know. The fine-grained quantitative claim, how much loss equals how much risk for a specific patient, is not yet locked in. Bottom shelf. Hypothesis. Mechanism plausible. Outcomes under investigation. Whether targeting any single early step through diet, through exercise, through specific nutrients, measurably extends life in any one individual is a harder question than the population data make it look. Population studies suggest yes. The specific dose response in a single person is fuzzier than the molecular biology would suggest. I am telling you this because the cascade is real. The mechanisms are real. The arterial dysfunction precedes the symptoms by decades. But anyone who tells you they know exactly how much of which intervention to apply to a specific patient to prevent a specific outcome is going beyond what the evidence supports. What the evidence does support very firmly is this. Your doctor's standard panel was not designed to detect early endothelial dysfunction. Your blood pressure cuff was not designed to detect early arterial stiffness. Your cholesterol number was not designed to count particles. And the disease starts long before any of those tests turn positive. That is what I want you to take seriously. So, what is being done about it? And by whom? A class of drugs called statins emerged in the 1980s. The first of them, lovastatin, was approved in 1987 by the United States Food and Drug Administration. Statins work by inhibiting an enzyme called HMG, coenzyme A reductase, which is the rate-limiting step in the body's manufacture of cholesterol. When the body makes less cholesterol, the liver upregulates the LDL receptor, the very receptor that Brown and Goldstein discovered, to scavenge more from the blood. apoB particle number drops. Trapping drops. The cascade I just described, all of it, gets nudged in the direction of lower risk. The drug works. Let me be clear about that. In secondary prevention, meaning in people who have already had a heart attack, statins reduce the chance of a second one substantially. The science is good. The drug is one of the genuine accomplishments of 20th century pharmaceutical chemistry. I will not pretend otherwise. It is also one of the most profitable classes of drugs ever invented. Tens of billions of dollars per year globally. An entire pharmaceutical industry has been built around managing the consequence of arterial dysfunction with a daily pill. Now ask the question the physicist asks. If the drug works because it reduces apoB particle number and stabilizes the endothelium, is there another way to do the same thing? Yes. Shear stress, the mechanical drag of blood across the endothelial surface, is the strongest natural activator of ENOS, the enzyme that produces nitric oxide. The activator of shear stress is movement. When you walk briskly, the blood velocity in your arteries increases. The shear stress increases. The enzyme switches on. More nitric oxide is produced. The nitric oxide both relaxes the muscle and acts as a local antioxidant on the endothelial surface itself. The artery, in motion, repairs the very conditions that lead to plaque. The old family doctor who told you to walk it off was loading the same molecular pathway that the statin chemist was trying to manipulate. From a completely different angle, with no copay, there is another angle. Dietary nitrate, found in leafy green vegetables, in beetroots, in certain herbs, is reduced in your mouth by bacteria that live on the surface of your tongue into nitrite. The nitrite is swallowed, absorbed, circulated, and converted by enzymes in your tissues back into nitric oxide. This is a backup pathway. It does not require ENOS. It does not require arginine. It works even when the endothelial enzyme has uncoupled. Salvador Moncada, the same Moncada who identified nitric oxide as the endothelial relaxing factor, has been one of the scientists working on this. The pathway is real. The effect on blood pressure has been demonstrated in human trials. Eating a portion of dark leafy greens or a beetroot in the morning meaningfully raises plasma nitrite for hours. The grandmother who told you to eat your greens was loading the nitric oxide pool through a backup pathway your endothelium uses when it is failing. Now I have to be honest about the dose comparison, because I will not oversell this to you. A statin, in the dose your doctor will prescribe, is stronger than a daily walk and a salad. In a patient who has already had a heart attack or who has a genetic disorder that produces overwhelming apoB levels, the statin is the correct intervention. The molecular leverage is greater. The clinical evidence is stronger. I would not tell anyone to throw away their prescription on the basis of a beet. But that is not the comparison the physicist is interested in. The physicist is interested in the patient who has not yet had the heart attack. The patient whose endothelium is failing slowly. The patient whose cholesterol number is technically normal, whose blood pressure is technically normal, whose doctor calls him healthy. For that patient, the early intervention is not pharmaceutical. The early intervention is mechanical and dietary and conducted on a pathway that nobody can patent, which is precisely why nobody is selling it to him. I want to think for a moment about a particular person, a man in his late 50s. He has a desk job. His annual checkup came back clean. His doctor said, "Keep doing what you are doing." He walks from his car to his office and from his office to his car. He eats lunch sitting down. He drives home. He sits down. He watches television. He sleeps. His endothelium has not been asked to produce shear stress at any meaningful intensity in 15 years. His Glycocalyx has been quietly thinning. His apoB particle number is high in the way that doctors used to call normal and now call concerning. He is one inflamed plaque rupture away from a phone call to his wife from an ambulance. His doctor calls him healthy. His arteries do not. Press your fingers to your wrist again. The pulse you feel is not just your heart. It is the artery wall, springing back with the elasticity of a tissue that depends on a single layer of cells beneath a half-micrometer coat of sugar to keep it functioning. That tissue is making decisions about you, right now, that no instrument in any standard clinic measures. It is making them every second. It has been making them every second for as long as you have been alive. Move. The endothelium needs the friction of moving blood to produce the molecule that keeps it open. Eat the things that load its backup pathway. The leaves, the roots, the bitter greens your grandmother put on your plate when you did not want them. And do not, please, mistake the absence of symptoms for the presence of health. Symptoms are the artery giving up. The work begins long before that. The springback, the push under your finger. That is the conversation you are inside of. Listen to it. Tell me what your own doctor has not measured in you.